So welcome to part 1, an introduction to storytelling. This is essentially my big pitch as to why I think storytelling is really useful for communicating technical ideas. And I've got 7 arguments to make for you. The first one is the fact that you're already good at storytelling. Stories are everywhere in our lives, not just in fictional books and TV shows, but also in the news, in advertising, and even how you talk to your friends down the pub. Our cultures and our societies are built on shared stories. Stories and narratives are also how we process what's going on in our own lives as well. To tell stories is to be human, all of which is to say that storytelling is an incredibly powerful method of communication. So by the fact that you're human, you're already a storyteller, and also your audiences are also human. So that means that they're accustomed to taking on information in the form of a story already. So if we're trying to communicate technical or difficult information, it's nice to package it up in a format that they are already familiar with. And if you think about massively complex stories, epic tales, there is no limit to the amount of complexity that we can take on if it's packaged up in a story format. I've trained thousands of researchers and technical people in the art of storytelling. And one of the main things that they often find hard about communicating their work is the fact that it often lacks human connection. They find it difficult to connect with their audiences and to keep their attention and to keep them listening. And storytelling can help to give us that human connection. Now, I'm not talking about fictionalizing or overly dramatizing your research or your technical content. What I'm talking about is understanding how storytelling can give us a structure to understand what order to give the information to our audience in a way that is going to be logical and with a linear narrative that they're going to be able to follow stepwise as you take them through difficult or new information. I like to think of storytelling as a thought process for ourselves that can help us to make sense of what we've got to say and to give it to our audience in a way that makes sense to them. And that brings me to my second argument, which is that storytelling can help us to make sense, both to help us make sense of our own work and for our audiences to make sense of what we're saying. Technical research or technical work is often a highly non-linear process. Stories can help us to communicate that because they are inherently linear. They have a linear narrative that we have to follow stepwise. So if you find that you sometimes struggle to understand what information from that massive, messy research to include in a simple story, thinking like a storyteller can really help you understand what to leave in and what to take out to simplify the narrative. The third reason why storytelling can be useful for us is because it helps us to engage. I want you to think of your favourite story. Could be your favourite book or movie or TV show, maybe your favourite real life story or a childhood favourite. Now I want you to think about why it's your favourite story. I've asked thousands of people what their favourite story is, and what often comes up is characters that we relate to and that we like, plots that are exciting, and often our favourite stories are tied up with memories. We frequently think about childhood stories as being some of our favourites. And I think our favourite stories are often our favourites because of how they made us feel, how they make us feel now. Our favourite stories might make us feel inspired or brave or safe. These are the ones that we recall and that we hold on to throughout our lives. And we can remember these stories years after we hear them because of how we engage with them emotionally. What happens when we tell a story is that we follow a main character along that journey. And when you tell the story of your work, you're usually the main character in that story. You're telling the story of what you've done or what you found. When we tell stories like that, we're asking our audience to imagine something that isn't in front of them and also to empathise with us as the character. When they empathise with the character, they start to feel the feelings that that character is feeling. So if we're going to tell the story of our work, we might talk about how exciting or intriguing or confusing it was when we went through that journey. Once we've got our audience feeling those feelings, they then trust us more, they like us more, they're going to remember what we've told them better. There's an amazing quote by Maya Angelou, which is one of my favourites, which is that I've learnt that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I'm not saying that you need to try and make your audiences cry or scream or shout with joy. It's not about feeling extreme emotions, but it's about making them care and keeping them listening through those emotions. Some of your audiences, if you're talking to the public, will never know what it is to do an experiment or to write a piece of code, but they will know what it is to be excited or frustrated or intrigued by something. So these are always the commonality that you have with your audience will always be these human emotions. The fourth reason why being a storyteller can be useful for us is that it helps us to put our work into context. Good storytellers at the beginning of the story invite their audiences into the world of that story. One of the biggest pitfalls that I see clever and technical people make when they're trying to communicate something is that they jump straight in with the detail and don't spend enough time inviting their audiences into the context of why it's important and why they should care. If what you've got to say to your audience is new or unfamiliar or complex, one of the best things that you can do is to spend a bit of time at the beginning inviting them into the world of the story. Reason number 5 is that storytelling gives us a structure. There are many different types of story and many different types of story structure that we can choose from. All cultures have their own archetypes and their own archetypal structures of stories. You might have heard of a simple 3-act structure that involves a beginning, a middle, and an end. But there are also 5-act structures. There are hero's journeys, which is a very Western type of storytelling. There's Kishon Tenketsu, which is a Japanese form of storytelling. And all of these have their own specific structures that they involve. For our purposes, what a story structure can do is to give you not a blank page. It gives you something to work from. I've found in my work that the prompts that a story structure give me cuts my writing time in half, and it can help to draw out forgotten or hidden details that can make the story more engaging and more interesting for our audience. Understanding story structure can inform us about what order to give the information to the audience in order to create context, to keep them interested, and to generate dramatic tension. And I'll talk more about that in the next section. Reason number 6 to tell a story is that it will tap into your audience's curiosity. A psychologist called George Lowenstein has defined the 4 ways to generate curiosity in an audience in the psychology of curiosity. The first is the posing of a question or the presentation of a puzzle. So one question might be, for example, who's the fastest person in the world? The second way to generate curiosity is the exposure to a sequence of events with an anticipated but unknown resolution. So if our question is who's the fastest person in the world, you might say, okay, let's do a running race to answer that question. So that's a sequence of events. The athletes arrive, they line up on the start line, the gun goes, they start running. That's a sequence of events, and our anticipation is that there's going to be a winner at the end. The third way to generate curiosity is the violation of expectations that triggers a search for an explanation. For example, if our running race ends and nobody is declared the winner, our expectations are violated there because we expected a winner and there isn't one. So we're curious as to why. And the fourth way to generate curiosity is knowledge of possession of information by someone else. Maybe an umpire was at the finish line and they saw who won the race, and we're curious to know from them who it was. For our purposes for communicating technical research, I'm going to mostly be focusing on the first of these, the posing of a question or the presentation of a puzzle. And the reason for this is that a lot of technical work, particularly academic research, but also just questions that your clients might pose to you or things that you've been asked to do, all of those revolve around asking questions about finding out something that we don't know or trying to do something. In the sciences, we might call this posing a hypothesis or the research question. We're in the business of asking questions and answering those. And this is why this sort of work is particularly well suited to being communicated as a story, because stories are also based on questions and answers. So we can make sure that we're tapping into our audience's curiosity by setting them up with a question that they care about and then telling them the answer. And the seventh and final reason as to why storytelling can be useful for us is that we're in the business of communicating change, and story is all about change. If you think about writing a report or giving a presentation, what you're talking about is what you've learned or what you've discovered or what you've done. In a job interview or in an investor pitch, you're persuading them to try and make a new thing happen and, in effect, to try and make a change happen. Almost all stories are about change as well, change to a place or change to a person. And that's the point, is that stories help us to process change through narrative. So change is at the root of story and the root of technical communication, and the two go hand in hand. Those are my 7 reasons as to why storytelling is particularly useful for our purposes of technical communication. Because you're already good at it, because it helps you make sense, because it helps you to engage, it gives you context, it gives you a structure to work from, it taps into your audience's curiosity, and because we're about communicating change. In the next part, I'm going to show you how you can start writing your own story by thinking about aims and audience.